unprecedented times. It's amazing that we have been able to go from a fully in-person Toastmasters network to all online, all the way from meetings to contests to our full conference. This didn't happen alone. There are a ton of volunteers behind the scenes. Some of them are on today that helped to make this happen. And our gracious speakers were so wonderful to be able to turn this into a virtual session. So I thank them as well. I also want to say, don't underestimate your power as a Toastmaster who is capable of putting on these virtual meetings and Zooms and things like that. This platform is what's going to help keep our community together. It is the one thing that'll keep those that are isolated feel less isolated while we're social distancing. So please reach out to others, help others that might need a little help getting started on this. And I hope to see you all at the rest of the events. I mean, this is day 4. We've got more this weekend. We've got a business meeting. President Gael will be doing a session in the afternoon, followed by Hall of Fame and a gala at night, which is going to be amazing. If you don't understand what we're going to do, you got to come check us out. International Speech Contest on Sunday. I want to see you all there. I'm thrilled that you all could be here and have a good time.
All right, hello everybody. I'm gonna take the reins a little bit just to teach you a little bit about Zoom. My name is Anthony Alexander and I'm the Program Quality Director for District 31. And it's my privilege to be able to see everyone together. I'm excited to see over 97 individuals and growing all in one screen. I've been in Contagion forever and it's good to see a bunch of smiling faces back at me, regardless of if it's just panels on a screen. So just to introduce you to the lay of the land of Zoom, the bottom of your screen, if you're on a PC, is basically going to be your home base. From the left part, you're going to see the little microphone that's going to allow you to mute and unmute yourself. You're going to see the little camcorder that's going to allow you to show your faces or block your faces if you need to put a little bit more makeup on. And then the other thing that is most important in regards to that bottom panel is the participants button. If you click that, that is going to create a panel on the right-hand side that's going to show you all the participants that are joining us tonight. All 101 of them. We're still growing. But the most important piece out of that is anyone that's a district official or anyone that's a moderator or someone that has the tag ask me anything will be able to help and assist you if you're having any technological issues, if you want to be heard, or if there's any questions or concerns that you have about tonight's session. Again, that is key if you need any assistance whatsoever. So please be sure to know about that little person's icon on the bottom, participants. Click that open, look for one of us, and we'll be able to help you out. Now, if you're on a tablet or a cell phone and you need to see that bottom panel because it goes back and forth as you haven't clicked on the screen in a while, when in doubt, just tap the screen once and it'll show you the same buttons on the bottom, similar to if you were on a PC. So you'll see the mic for the mute and unmute yourself. You'll see the video camcorder to show yourself or block your picture, and the participants button to do the same thing to find one of us if you need help. Without further ado, and if you have any other questions before I get into the introductions, please, please, please find me under District 31 Toastmasters. That's me, just in case you can't find Anthony Alexander on the list. I'll be moderating the chat, and if you have any questions, I can find you through there. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to introduce tonight's final participant breakout session. We've been doing this for 4 days straight, and I'm glad that this is going to close it out before we get into our keynotes this weekend. But this is actionable evaluation. So we have a very masterful moderator along with some key panelists that are going to talk about real-time experiences in their professional and even Toastmasters lives of how to not only give effective evaluations, but how to practically apply the skills of evaluation so people can progress and get better. Just a few words about our moderator tonight, and he'll introduce our panelists when I turn the tables over to him. His name is David Lintz. He is a 3-time Triple Crown recipient. He is our current Area 31 director, and he's also a club mentor for 2 clubs. Just to give you a little bit more of a background about how he already applies his evaluation skills in Toastmasters. One other thing that I also want to hone in on is he is closing in on his Distinguished Toastmaster, so I'm looking forward to seeing his name on that list before the end of this year. He's also the immediate past president of Advanced Access Toastmasters in Brookline. So in Advanced Toastmasters Club, they have critical evaluations in that club. So evaluations at its core there. Outside of Toastmasters, he's also a lawyer, and he's also had experience as a lawyer in both the corporate setting and in the legal law firm setting, where again, in his professional experience, it has to do a lot with managing employees, managing clients, managing CEOs, and also C-suite individuals, and evaluating where they are in terms of their business layout, where they have to do with their legal documentations and what have you. So just a wealth of knowledge having to do with the subject of evaluations and how to get people to become better or close out deals quicker. So I've said enough about David Lintz. He's going to say a lot about his experiences and also tap into our panelists to gauge their experiences with evaluation. But I'm going to turn the tables over to our moderator tonight, David Lintz. So welcome.
Thank you so Okay. Can everybody hear me? If you can put a thumb up if you can. Oh, good. All right. Okay. So thank you, Anthony. Just one small correction to make. I'm closing in on my DTM not quite as quickly as you would like me to. So if you don't see me standing up this time, by 2021, you should see me standing up, God willing. So on behalf of myself and my panelists,
I am still looking forward to it either way.
Lee Goodwin, and Michael. Okay, good. So welcome to this evening's CLCON breakout session on actionable evaluation. Before we proceed, I want everybody to know that the session is being recorded, so just be aware of that. And as Anthony mentioned, this session will be a little different from what you've seen over the last 3 nights. Instead of one presenter, we're going to have a panel of 4 outstanding evaluators delivering the content. And my thought is that there are a number of different styles for delivering effective, actionable evaluations. And really the best way to get a sense of the diversity of the styles is to hear from multiple evaluators, each with their own stories and perspectives to share. Hopefully, you'll hear a few things this evening that will resonate with you and will help you to improve your effectiveness as an evaluator. We hope that you'll be active participants, asking questions and making comments. I believe that becoming effective evaluators is one of the most important things we can do as Toastmasters. And I think you heard some of that last night as well for the people who were on Halim's presentation. The relevance of the set of skills that go into evaluation extends far beyond the Toastmasters meeting and the contest venue, but into our personal and our work lives as well. If you could think for a moment about an example of how you've taken some of the skills you have developed as an evaluator and applied them outside the Toastmasters content. If you're willing to post your example in chat, that would be wonderful. I'm going to just put the question there now. Some of the skills you might think about are careful listening skills or analytical skills or clear communication skills that you've applied. Perhaps you have an example of how you applied some of these skills to become more successful at your job or in your relationships, or to contribute to somebody else's personal growth. Perhaps you acknowledged something that a colleague did really well, or you pointed out something that someone else could have done better that they weren't aware of, or how they could do something better that they had been struggling with. As I said, if you have an interesting example, please take a moment to post it in chat. And when we start going to questions, I'll read some of them out and talk about how they might be applying to what we're talking about. So just to give you a little bit more background about myself, as Anthony mentioned, I've spent most of my career as a lawyer in both the law firm and a corporate setting. I joined Toastmasters in 2014, worked my way through Advanced Communicator Bronze and Advanced Leader Bronze, and similar, I'm guessing, to an experience of a lot of other Toastmasters, switched over to Pathways immediately when I saw that I wouldn't have enough time to earn a DTM in the traditional program. I'm a member of Advanced Access Toastmasters in Brookline, which is one of 9 advanced clubs in our district, along with 2 of our panelists, Lee Goodwin and Gail O'Brien. For those of you who don't know, advanced clubs are clubs that restrict their memberships to Toastmasters who have achieved a certain level of proficiency, usually the completion of the Competent Communicator Manual or 3 levels in Pathways. Typically, advanced clubs put a lot of emphasis on evaluation, with the goal of taking people who are already reasonably good speakers and getting them to the next level. I believe that my most significant growth experiences in Toastmasters have come from giving and receiving evaluations, which is what inspired me to organize this panel discussion. And now a brief introduction to our panelists. Alice Leung is a lead scientist at Raytheon BBN Technologies, where she studies new approaches to using interactive experiences to change or study human behavior. She is a founding member of BBN Toast Wizards from 2014. She likes getting to know her colleagues at the club, but also enjoys visiting and learning from Toastmasters at other clubs. She meandered through CC and CL and started wandering through Pathways. Gail O'Brien is a distinguished Toastmaster, as well as an executive coach, culture coach, speech coach, and presenter. In addition to belonging to Advanced Access, she's a member of the Staples Toastmasters Club. She publishes the Week in Ethics blog, is a business ethics magazine columnist, and created the Ethics Coach column for Entrepreneur magazine. Gail is a Kalman Executive Fellow at the Hoffman Center for Business Ethics at Bentley University, and a Senior Fellow, Social Innovation, at the Lewis Institute at Babson College. When Lee Goodwin is not improving the writing of others or providing content for publications and websites, he inspires others to improve their presentation and public speaking skills at the Speak Up Cambridge Toastmasters Club. As I noted earlier, he also belongs to the Advanced Access Club. He worked as a journalist for newspapers and various business magazines before moving on to corporate communications and content marketing. He enjoys discovering new music and recipes, overlooked documentaries, and soul singers. He also runs the micro-organization, Cambridge Bread Rescue, through which he and his team have rescued many thousands of breads and pastries and delivered them to people in need since 2003. Michael Moore is a data governance specialist, helping to make information actionable for various organizations. He lives with his wife and 2 school-age sons in a house nestled in the woods in Chelmsford, Massachusetts. Michael has been a Toastmaster since 2010 and is currently a club retention chair for District 31 and a member of an advanced club, Accelerators Advanced, as well as MITRE Toastmasters. If I could say 4 quick things about our use of Zoom as our platform for conducting this virtual panel discussion. You want to be in speaker mode, which means that you have a large video of the speaker in the middle of the screen with thumbnails of the other participants on the top. You should be in it. Speaker view is the default mode. If for some reason you're not in speaker view or you lost it, just click the speaker view button in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Next, please ask questions, and if you do so, do it through the chat feature in Zoom. I have breaks in our presentation for where we'll take questions, but just put them in whenever you think of them. And please make comments. If you want to make a comment, again, use the chat feature in Zoom to let us know. We'll give you an opportunity to do so as soon as we can. And in order to reduce background noise, the Zoom host will mute all of the audience, but will not mute the panelist and me. So with that, I'd like to start out with some questions about evaluation style. Lee, I've heard you say that for you, evaluating a speech is like eating a good meal. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. David, I don't know about you, David, but I love to listen to speeches. And for me, they are food for thought. Now, when we eat at a friend's house or at a restaurant, we're enjoying our food, but we're not normally eating critically, whereas we're not analyzing for the balance of salt, fat, acid, heat, unless perhaps you're a chef or a restaurant critic. But perhaps if we did try to perceive those things, we'd appreciate that food more and we'd pay more attention to what we're eating. Now, when we're evaluating, we have to listen and consider structure, content, and how the speaker is relating to the audience. And for me, I'm always looking for that secret ingredient. What can I bring out that is essential but isn't obvious? And my biggest fear is missing something that is essential and important. I want to give an example. Someone in our advanced club, Advanced Access, gave a speech about being sexually assaulted as an adult. There were related incidents. It was deeply personal. And there were several guest evaluators that night. And one of them suggested that the speaker needed to inject some humor or lightness because this was so heavy for the audience. That was eye-opening for me. And it was something that I wouldn't have thought of, but I also felt it took guts in that situation to make a suggestion like that. Now, at my club Speak Up Cambridge not long ago, while I was admiring all the cool and clever slides that a speaker had assembled, one of our evaluators very perceptively told the speaker that the speech would have been, a whole presentation would have been so much better if he had cut probably a third of those slides. Something, again, that was obvious, but not to me. Now, Bill Lewis, I think, who is here tonight and is known to a lot of Toastmasters here at District 31, once presented a speech about working with a religious group to rebuild after Hurricane Katrina. And he spoke at length about finding common ground with the people he was working with, despite the political differences. But the evaluator began by saying that this was actually a speech about a journey. And then she deconstructed the entire speech without any notes. And for me, that was a masterclass in evaluating, and I can still taste it.
I love thinking about some of these missing things or some of the special things as the secret ingredient in the story about the person who was assaulted. The secret ingredient and missing being the humor that you would try to figure out a way to put in, although a huge challenge in a speech like that. And of course, in Bill's speech, which I heard also, which was wonderful, it was a speech, the topic on one thing, but it really covered something else. So interesting points. I'm going to move on to Alice for a minute, who has described her style as unsystematic, which seems to be contrary to what we always think about in Toastmasters. So tell us, Alice, how does an unsystematic evaluator critique a speech?
Well, I definitely feel like with this panel, I am the least experienced. And also, I would say that I'm unsystematic when I go into a speech evaluation because I don't listen to a speech with a checklist of things that I want to evaluate. I'm primarily listening for things that the speaker did well, particularly cool things that catch my attention, the things that really stood out that connected with me. I do think about categories like the content and organization, like the delivery, but I really like to focus on an overall impression and what's going to stay with me. For new speakers, in particular, I try to notice positives where common mistakes or problems are absent, things that someone might not realize that they're doing well. They might not realize that they're enunciating clearly or that they're not looking tense because they might feel really tense but not be conveying it. So the idea of telling someone something that they're really doing well so that they can keep doing it, it's not something that people realize themselves because a lot of us are quite self-critical. I feel like when I'm identifying something to improve for a speaker, I like to look for something that's really concrete and immediate, something that if they repeated that same speech tomorrow, they could put these things into action. I mean, if I was telling someone to increase their vocal variety, I wouldn't just say, it'd be great if you had more vocal variety. I would like to say something like, that part of your speech where you talked about almost falling out of your canoe, you could have said, ah, or that part where you were trying to get to the bathroom of the camp without waking anyone up, you could have whispered that part, just so that they can really do it if they repeated the speech the next day. I think the exception for that is a more advanced speaker, when instead of telling them something that they need to improve, I would think of it more as telling them something where they could challenge themselves, something that was already quite good, but if they paid a lot of attention, maybe they could make it amazing. There, I think, because I'm not that amazing of a speaker, maybe I couldn't give them detailed instructions, but I could describe the idea so that it's focused enough that they can think it over themselves, and they could talk to other people for opinions, and they could experiment and come up with an idea. That's something like, I loved your humor, I loved those jokes, but some of those jokes might have been easy laughs, and your speech was so thought-provoking, maybe you could think about a joke that gets in a little deeper. So that's my unsystematic approach, where I try to listen for things that strike me and things that I took away from their speech, and then I try to bring it to their attention.
So I always thought of Alice's style as flexible. I've been on the receiving end of some of her evaluations, and I've seen Alice give a lot of evaluations. And one of the things I think that make Alice a very effective evaluator is she's not wed to a certain topic or a certain thing to look at. I know there are a number of evaluators who are very focused on vocal variety or gestures or something about the content of the story or whatever. They just have their thing that's important to them. And Alice, I would have to say, is one of the most flexible evaluators I ever saw. So maybe flexible is a more positive term than unsystematic, but either way. I'd like to turn now to Gail O'Brien. And I've also heard her give a number of evaluations in the Advanced Access Club. And very frequently, Gail, you talk about a speaker's authenticity. Can you explain what this means and why it's important?
I do talk about authenticity, because authenticity is something that when a speaker has it in that speech, they fuel a kind of energy that transforms the speech. Authenticity means a lot of different things, and I think it needs to be on our radar as evaluators. Authenticity is about being real, showing up with a sense of clear purpose of what's important to you. It's about being grounded, and especially it's about bringing our whole selves to the speech, to our work, to relationships. It's also one of the key qualities in presence. And for those of you who may know Amy Cuddy, who is a social psychologist, she has 6 qualities of presence. It starts with passionate, enthusiastic, captivating, comfortable, authentic, and confident. And I think there's a cycle to that that's really important. If we're passionate and enthusiastic, we pull people toward us, so we are in fact captivating. If we're comfortable in our own skin, we create comfort for those who are listening to us. And again, the authenticity is a function of the things that have gone before it, and also how it helps fuel confidence. The problem is we can lose authenticity really quickly. It's a function of not being present anymore, getting into our own head, forgetting what the impact is that we want to have. I know that because I did it in a Toastmasters speech at my Staples Club. I had returned from California and had just moved back to Massachusetts, and I had been invited to give 2 speeches in Oklahoma. Both of them were my first paid speaking gigs. And I was excited to use my 7 minutes in a speech at Staples to try out the first 7 minutes of what I intended the following month to be the beginning of my talk. And I was delighted to get a really positive evaluation that made me feel that I was on the right track. But after the meeting, a man walked up who wasn't a Staples Toastmaster member, but what might have been a guest, or he may have been a Staples executive. He walked over and he said, "So, it was a really good speech. Why did you grimace?" And I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about, and said, And he said, "Let me repeat. When you walked back to your seat from the front of the room, you grimaced, and I want to know why." And I said, "Oh, well, yeah, I was remembering that I had forgotten to say something really important in the beginning of my speech, and I was thinking about that." And he said, well, for me, when someone grimaces, it's a red flag that their credibility is being impacted, that they either made a mistake in the information they provided, or they're not really confident in what their information was. And so while you gave a really good speech, my takeaway is going to be your grimace. And I can't tell you how much I've appreciated that over the last 7 years. It was a great thing to say. To Lee's point, being really direct and letting someone know out of caring for their speech effectiveness is an incredibly generous kind of thing to do. What I realized was that by getting into my own head, I had stopped caring or seeing that there was still an audience that might be watching me as I was walking back, as they were processing whatever it was I said last. And they deserved my full attention, because the point of giving a speech is to share what we really care about and why it's important. And I took that away from myself by completely zoning out into the space of trying to have a perfect speech, when it's rare that any of us can probably pull that off. What matters the most, I believe, is that we have an authentic speech.
I love that story for a number of reasons. One is that we often think about the speech starting with our first word and ending with our last word. And of course, it's not true. It starts when people first notice us, as we first start getting up.
Absolutely.
On our way back to the seat and so forth. And the second thing is, if you forget something in your speech, unless it really affects the flow of the content or creates confusion, the only one who knows that you forgot it or knows that you made a mistake is yourself. And there's something to be said, if not in politics, at least in giving speeches, about the benefit of reasoning it through. If you dropped something, you dropped it, you smile for the rest of your content. So great reminder, thank you. I'm going to turn to Michael Moore now, who often focuses on the story arc when he evaluates. So Michael, maybe you could give us an example of how a story arc relates to dramatic tension when handled well, and audience confusion when handled poorly.
Sure. My default is to focus on the story arc. If I don't have specifics that the speaker has said they're working on, or the specific project that they're filling out, I'm focusing on how they organize their speech to convey their message and how they use stories to make a point. Sometimes, though, that story can be missing something to complete the story arc. And as an audience member, I sometimes get caught on that missing piece. A friend of mine was giving a story about a child who could hear other children playing in a park outside their kitchen window. This was a very small child who couldn't actually go to the door and walk out to where the friends were, but they could see the kitchen window was open and there was a tree outside of it. the person told the story about how the child would climb on a chair, climb onto the counter, climb out the window, and climb into that tree. Their speech then went on to talk about all sorts of different points about going for something that you want to get. But they never came back around to say that the child got down from the tree and got over there to play with the friends. So as a listener, as their evaluator, I got to tell them in my evaluation that I was still stuck with that child in that tree. Because they hadn't concluded that story, they kind of left me hanging. It's a technique you could use where you've got a story where the first half of the arc gets broken by another set of stories, and then you finish the arc. But if you never finish it, you're leaving a person hanging. And so being able to pay attention to that sort of story arc is my normal style of evaluation.
So the notion of story arc is actually broader than just that example. You also use it in terms of the ordering of points being made by a speaker. And you had told me a very interesting story, I thought, about a speaker who you thought gave a pretty dry speech, in large part because of the way he ordered his points. Can you tell me what you did to help the speaker breathe some life into that otherwise dry speech?
Sure. I tend to think of it more as fact-filled,
okay,
stuff with information that, as opposed to dry. A speaker got up to tell about a technical skills share group. They help people hone their skills between jobs. And they had all these facts and figures about the success of that group, but each time they would tell us the facts, which had no context to them, and then they would say the reason that those facts matter. Over and over again for each different part of their speech, they would say all the different details and then tell us why it mattered. When it came to giving the evaluation for that, I honestly got up and said, you've got to flip this entire speech upside down. Start with the reason that it matters. Start with what it is that these facts actually are backing up, because then people are curious. You make this statement and now, okay, so how does that work? Why is it that people are getting hired away from this group? And then you give the facts and figures about how many of them are getting hired and now they have to do a full-time job and they don't have time to hone their skills anymore because they're not between jobs. The next time that person gave the speech, they had flipped it upside down. They had given the reason for all those facts. And so people were curious about what was going on. And it became a much better speech because he was able to look at how he was presenting the information to make people curious about all those facts and figures.
It's so interesting. We have a number of members in Toastmasters, and in my former club, we had virtually everybody working in a technical job where they had to make technical presentations. And I think often the mindset is, as long as I get in all the facts and somebody walks away with all the facts, I've done my job, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
This is just a very good way of thinking about how even when you're giving something that's potentially very technical, very fact-based, there's still a way that you can inject some, not excitement, at least some interest into it about how you organizing. It's not just how you say it, it's also when you say it. So very good thing to keep in mind. So thank you. I'd like all of you have evaluated speakers at various levels, and all of you have been doing evaluations for a number of years. So there's a couple challenges evaluators have. One is adjusting for the speaker's experience and skill level. And the other is when you have a lot of things to say, either positive or, as people refer to it, as gifts to improve what they're going to do. And this is something that Halim talked about also. How do you set priorities and what to address when you only have 2 or 3 minutes to give your evaluations? So Lee, let me start with you.
For me, I don't have any secrets really. It's just, it was when I competed in evaluation competitions that I had to figure out, how do you structure this? What do you do? And I make columns of what I liked and what I didn't like, and then I pick those top 3 or 4 things. And again, I pull back and think about what is obvious that I'm missing here. What aren't people seeing? Looking for that secret ingredient that is going to put this speech in some sort of context. And of course, and other people will say this as well, but since I'm going first, whatever you give to people needs to be appropriate to where they are in their speech making journey. And that's easier in a sense for speakers who are less experienced, and more challenging for the evaluator for a speaker who seems to do everything perfectly. And usually in those cases, I look for content.
So it's interesting, we had Stuart Pink, who won the International Speech Contest at the District 31 level, I think for the last 2 years. I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm wrong. But he came to our Advanced Access Club to give his speech, and somebody had the job of evaluating him. And instead of getting up and saying, you know, I evaluate you with some humility, or it's hard to think of anything that you're doing wrong, she got up and said, you know, this is a challenge. I love a challenge. And immediately rattled off 4 things he could be doing to improve that speech. Just one of the more humorous moments. But all of the 4 things had some substance to them. Very interesting. Gail, let's get your views on this.
Well, I love that I am an outside member of a corporate club, because when I do evaluations for my home club, I'm very mindful that most of the people are from Staples. So I want very much to look at things that would translate into their increased effectiveness in the types of situations they might have presenting at work. I especially enjoyed doing table topics, I'm sorry. I especially enjoyed doing the first time.
Icebreaker.
Thank you, icebreaker, yes. I'm not that far removed from it, but you know, it helps to be reminded. I'm excited about icebreakers, and I know how mine first felt 8 years ago, 9 years ago actually. And it's really important to encourage the spirit of curiosity and engagement around how new members of the club can feel a sense of belonging sooner. And I think how we give an evaluation to newcomers to the club is really important, and how we support with ongoing feedback, whether we are evaluating them or not for the next several speeches, how we give ongoing support, because all of us benefit from knowing that people care about the speeches we do and what we say and who we are. And I think that's what makes the club experience so strong. And that's why I think it's so important to nurture it.
Terrific. And Alice, what are your thoughts?
If there's a lot of things and I have to prioritize, I think I would prioritize one message coming from the vantage point of a not good listener. So to tell them something from the point of view of a person that was half listening, so a place that they might have been confused about the message. And then I would also like to tell them something from the point of view of an advanced listener. So this might be telling them that I got a message that they didn't explicitly say. Something like, you talked about 3 examples of fun learning, but I felt like you were really saying that learning isn't just about knowing stuff, but about becoming a different person. So if I had to prioritize, I would try to say something from the point of view of a listener who might not understand, and then something from the point of view of a listener who was really thinking about it.
Thank you. I hear a voice in the background. I don't know if somebody's not muted, but Michael, let's get your take on this.
Sure. I pay attention to the level of speaker as well as to their attitude about feedback when I'm planning my evaluation. You know, if I'm evaluating someone who has multiple distinguished Toastmaster awards, they're giving 150 speeches a year, they're members of multiple clubs, you all may know who I'm talking about. I'm going to be able to give a much more detailed evaluation of what they're doing, getting into the specifics of how I see they're acting. When I'm working with someone, they may have finished level 2 in pathways, they're really excited to improve, they're maybe dealing with a language barrier of being able to convey their intelligence. But when they hear evaluation, they love hearing what people have to say that they can improve. They lap it up. And so being able to give that person the details that are going to help them move to the next level is what I can bring to that evaluation. If I have someone who is their own worst critic, they have so much self-criticism. You know, I had someone who got up and gave an icebreaker. They had slides, but they didn't quite work right. They weren't able to get their message across. They were getting distracted. And at the end of the speech, they were incredibly frustrated. They knew they had done terribly. That person needed the encouragement of, I think you did this well and this well. You may want to focus on this specific piece that they had done well and could improve, instead of focusing on their slides, focusing on the little hiccups that they had done, so that they can gain the confidence and have a specific thing that they can work on. That's a very different evaluation for me, where someone is already beating themselves up about their speech, as opposed to someone who is just waiting to hear what are the next things I can work on. So talking to the person beforehand is the best way for me to know where on that scale is a person going to fit. You know, for my colleagues in a club, I will know, but for people that I haven't met before, I have to have that talk beforehand so I know where are they coming from, what are they expecting, and what do they want help with.
A really important point about talking to the speaker ahead of time. I know that we're told to do it and we try to remember to do it. And I'll make a confession myself, sometimes honored more in the breach than the observance, but it really is important. And I know how much I appreciate when I'm going to give a speech, if the evaluator calls me ahead of time. First of all, it shows some level of caring, which establishes a level of trust with the evaluator. And second, I'm more likely to get an evaluation that will be actionable for me because I know it's going to be focused on some of the things that I'm working on. So thank you for that.
David, you are not the only one who often forgets to make that contact beforehand, especially now that we're online. Although now I can use the chat box and talk to the person directly before their speech. So that works out pretty well when we're here online.
There are some advantages to Zoom technology. We'll be talking about that a little later in the session, but I hadn't thought about that in terms of evaluation. So thank you for that. I'm going to break for a second to just read some of what came over the chat. I sent out the question earlier about an example of how you've taken some of the skills you've developed as an evaluator and applied them outside the Toastmaster context. So we have the winner of the evaluation contest from, again, somebody will correct me if I got it wrong, from 2 years ago, Ruth Levitsky, who was the first to respond. She gets the prize for that. And she also gets the prize for having the most unexpected response to my question. The way she uses her evaluation skills in real life is to help members of the flute session be in tune. Something I never thought about as a use, certainly not for me, but good to hear. Let's see what else we have. From Laura Leung, talking about use them to have a coaching conversation with my team member. Great example. Everybody who's involved in some sort of managerial role or some sort of training role, you know, how do you do it, particularly when you're observing somebody doing a job? How do you give them the feedback that's really going to help them get better, that's candid with them, but at the same time isn't demotivating? That's one of the things we learn in Toastmasters. I have something from Panos, who, my God, 2 in the morning to 3 in the morning, and he's still sticking with us. So respect to Panos for that. who writes, when you know that you know how to talk, you have a great sense of control during adverse situations at work and in daily life, has served me on numerous occasions. So I think a lot of us can relate to that. And then from Jane, I don't know the last name, presentation, project management, lead by example. Yes, I've dealt with a lot of project managers, a number of whom have been members of Toastmasters, who've made a similar comment that evaluation in a lot of ways, the way it's taught at Toastmasters, feels a lot like managing a project the way that you think about it. Again, at work, writing staff reviews from Melinda Spencer, helping my daughter in writing assignments, all sorts of things. Let's see. So I think those are some of the interesting ones. One comment, Alice, that your cookies look delicious. I'm not sure if that was an answer to my question or just something else. If anybody has a question that they want to throw up now, would be a good time to toss it up. We can take it now. Otherwise, we'll move on to a few more questions to the panelists. And if I don't pick up your question now, we'll have other breaks that we can do it. So one thing I wanted to talk about a little bit more was advanced clubs, and 3 of the members of this panel, Michael and Gail and Lee, are all members of advanced clubs. Gail and Lee belong to Advanced Access, and Michael belongs to the Accelerators Advanced Club. So thumbs up for Michael. I'm going to start on this one with Gail and Lee. If you could tell us something about the distinguishing features in the Advanced Access approach to evaluation.
Gail, do you want me to go first?
Absolutely, Lee.
Okay. So first of all, for me, belonging to one club is I have my hands full, and it's only because Advanced Access is so valuable that I make the effort to belong to another club. And I especially love doing evaluations there because it really pushes me as an evaluator to go beyond what I would normally do. So in addition to the usual building blocks of structure and content and delivery, we are expected to consider how a speech provided value, for instance. What sort of insights or benefits did it offer to us as an evaluator, as an audience member? What made the speech memorable for us? And how can the speaker challenge themselves? Now, we've covered some of those things here as we're speaking, but there is an expectation that you're going to go beyond what's expected of a normal evaluation and really consider all these other points and provide a much more comprehensive and insightful evaluation than would normally give. Gail?
What I love is that when several of us got together after a meeting or during a break and started to talk about how can we elevate our evaluations as an advanced club, that the 4 of us in talking suddenly became 9 of us. And so we had a wonderful committee that spent several months just kicking around together. How is it that we can rise to the occasion of distinguishing ourselves with evaluations? And for some of us, it was really important that presence and the attributes of presence, and I'm one of those, was part of how we would look at people and how we would look at the opportunities for better evaluations. It was also important to think about engagement from a more detailed standpoint so that there would be more specificity around it. And it was also very important to think about how we connect with the audience through engagement, but how we connect in terms of evaluations getting a higher priority on the part of the evaluator. We have asked our members to contact prior to the meeting via phone call, however early they want to, in the process, checking in with the speaker and wanting context so that we're not just confined by what the level might say is the objective, but we want to understand more about where the speaker is coming from. Some people love that. Some people are happy just giving minimal information, but that has allowed a deeper level of evaluation. The other thing that we thought was really important is we wanted the evaluators to grow. So we built in two things that we think are useful. One is that the general evaluator, as the evaluator goes back to his or her seat, and the general evaluator takes over the group session. And the group session is really important because lots of wonderful things happen in terms of the spontaneity of people's comments building off each other. But the other aspect of that is that before the group evaluation starts, the general evaluator, without saying anything about the specifics of what the speaker talked about, raises issues about one point of excellence that he or she found that the evaluator had, which is useful for the evaluator to hear. The other thing is evaluators have the opportunity to ask somebody prior to the meeting, please evaluate me, let me know what my strengths and weaknesses were in doing that. So we want to support the whole idea that evaluations are so applicable in our club, but in our work, that it matters to really give them attention. And I'm grateful that we do.
Thank you. Michael, how does accelerators do it differently from advanced access?
I think the biggest difference for us is that we have roundtable evaluations. You start with one person who has the project form and gives a 2 to 3 minute evaluation. But then we go around the table. Everyone at the meeting gets a chance to speak, to say what they noticed or what they thought about the speech. So that includes the members, that includes guests, new Toastmasters who come to visit. Everyone has an opinion about the speech that they can share, and we welcome those different viewpoints. Sometimes people just have a point or two to make. Sometimes they pass, of course, especially if all of the points that they wanted to make had already been covered. But often you get very different opinions, very different thoughts about a person's speech. And so you get this vast set of knowledge so that you can build on that of knowing how different people thought about your speech. We have 3 minutes between speakers so that we can take more copious notes, and we provide those notes to the speakers afterwards so they can read through, even if I didn't have time to give all the different points that I made in my evaluation speech. We also only require 2 levels in pathways or 6 speeches in a CC manual. We have a slightly lower bar for entry so that people who want to improve their speaking can get started in our advanced club quickly. We also do work on leadership skills, especially doing large projects of how can you do an open house even better each time you do it. Capture those great ideas and share them with others as you're improving your leadership skills. We also have a lot of great camaraderie among the members, among the guests. But the biggest piece is that difference of everyone being able to practice their evaluation skills, practice listening, and figuring out what they might be able to add to the conversation about a speech.
So we do the group evaluation in advanced access as well. I think maybe a little different than it's done in the accelerators. I can tell you, I've often found it very helpful that somebody will pick up a point when I've given a speech that's been important for me to know. And at least on one occasion where I was critiqued on something, somebody else stood up and said, I disagree. I thought that was good. So it was actually very validating.
As well. And sometimes it's 2 very different points they have.
Yes.
Of course, the speaker always has the option to say, that was really good. Well, not to say, but I've certainly taken advice from various evaluators and said, that's really great advice, but I don't have to use everything that I'm told.
No,
So
exactly.
you get to pick and choose what it is you're going to use to improve your speeches.
Yeah. Gail and Lee, anything more to say on the group evaluation? Okay.
I think what helps in the group evaluation is that the spirit of community, we have such good evaluators in the club, and we've had in the past, that there is a really important kind of synergy that after people are through with what your speech was, you have just a rich, to use Lee's metaphor, a rich menu of opportunities to really pick and choose from. And it's a nice distinction, because when we worked hard to give a speech, it really matters that there's a lot of attention being given to what we could have done or might do again in the future.
And certainly as an evaluator, I'm listening for that group evaluation for anything that I missed.
Right.
So it's the competitor in me.
No, that's really an excellent point. That in that sense, it's a benefit to the main evaluator as well as to the speaker, that the main evaluator can see what they might have covered that they didn't. So thank you for that. So Alice, I'm going to toss back to you the question I started the session with that we put on the chat. I know that you think a lot about the application of what you learned at Toastmasters to your professional and personal life. We've had conversations about that in the past. Can you share a few examples with us?
I think that the power of evaluation and feedback is even bigger in your normal life than it might be in Toastmasters meetings. And I've seen this both as a person giving evaluations and a person getting evaluations. Now, something that can shock tech people when they come into a Toastmasters meeting is that everyone who gives a speech gets some positive and thoughtful feedback. And that's because it's so rare in a lot of professional settings. Last year, I was delighted to welcome a new member of my research team who had just come from academia with a lot of creative ideas and jumped in with so much energy and really quickly got some experiments going that we'd been stalled on for months. But one day after a team call, she emailed me to apologize that it might take a few days to complete this analysis that we talked about. And I was shocked that she was apologizing because she was doing things so much faster than I thought was even possible. And I realized that I had never told her that she was doing a great job. And so when I responded to the email, I responded with an apology, apologizing for never having told her that I was so happy to be working with someone who was as effective and efficient and pleasant and fun. She told me later that getting that kind of praise in a professional setting was so unusual for her that she actually cried. And that she was so shocked, she went onto academic Twitter and shared my words with other people. Lots of those people also said, I have never heard anything positive from my coworkers or my manager. And that made me think, gosh, people like me, all of us, we're part of the problem. Why aren't we telling people in our professional lives when they're doing a great job? Why is it that if someone normally is satisfying all of our expectations and being amazing, we wait until they might do a little wrong thing to give them some feedback? So I really came away with that feeling that that the power of giving someone an evaluation and the responsibility of making sure to give people positive feedback when they're doing a lot of things wonderfully. But then, you know, my experience getting evaluations, I think about how sometimes the things that people tell you after a speech, they're not just your speech quirks, they're your life quirks. They apply really broadly. The evaluation from Toastmasters I remember the most was when I was giving a speech about a discouraging episode of racism and sexism that I'd experienced and how I dealt with it. The evaluator noted that although I was speaking about a situation that obviously made me sad and angry at the time, I wasn't showing a range of negative emotions in my voice or expressions. This really struck me because I realized that it's not just in Toastmasters, it's not just in giving speeches. I don't tend to emote negative emotions in an obvious or expressive way to the people around me. Now, sometimes this is super handy, like if someone at work that you don't want to offend says something really stupid and you don't show anger or upset. So that can be handy. But I think that overall, non-verbally signaling to people that you're unhappy with something that just happened, or even showing emotional vulnerability as a leader to say, I'm sad this thing happened, I'm disappointed. It gives everyone else the permission to also be unhappy and then move on. So I came away with that evaluation realizing that I was missing some important communication tools from my own toolbox, and that it made my New Year's resolution to practice communicating negative emotions. And that has been a really interesting and educational experience in my life. And it came from a Toastmasters evaluation.
So I'm curious, has anybody asked you why after the first of the year you became so angry, or?
They haven't. And one of the things I think for people who are typically worried about being too mad or too negative, it's probably the case that you can ramp it up quite a bit before other people start being bothered by it. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think that's exactly right. I see on our question feed a question from Division Director and Education Chair Extraordinaire Michelle Bisco, asking how evaluations are different in online meetings. Michael, I'm going to pass that on to you. I might broaden the context of the question a little bit. I'm guessing that everybody in this audience, or virtually everyone, has been in video meetings over the last 2 months. Quite a few of us have had to give speeches or make presentations via Zoom or its equivalent. When you evaluate a video cast speech, what are the things that you look for? And what are some of the tips that you give to speakers?
I had a chance to do this recently. One of my club members was practicing for a speech contest, and they were having a difficult time with their presence for their online presence. We started talking about what their background was going to be because they didn't have a lot of space in their house to be able to arrange something. But once it got to the actual speech, I got to, instead of listening to the story arc and listening to all the other parts of the speech, I just watched what I could see on the screen. And when I gave the evaluation, I got to talk about the various pieces that were going on. For instance, at the beginning of the speech, the entire beginning of the speech, he was looking at the camera. He did not, his head did not move, his hands weren't moving. It was as if it was a still piece with just the mouth moving, because he had been told, your audience is right there. It's the camera. Don't look elsewhere because your audience is there. It felt very strange to me. I'm used to a speaker who might talk about, you know, the Madame Contest Master, fellow Toastmasters, and honored guests. So that you're talking about an audience that is larger than just the one person that you're talking to. It also allows you to be talking about something, not really looking at someone, and then make a really important point where you look right at the person. except with online presence, looking right at the person means you're looking right at everyone. But it has more power when you've been able to look away. He did not, no, it's not that he didn't get the concept. It was just foreign to him to look anywhere other than at the camera. So he had to set up stuffies to the left and right of his computer so that he had a bigger audience that he could talk to. We talked a lot about gestures. For some people, they're doing all their gestures down at waist level, and I've taken to actively practicing what gestures can I do up where people can see them, or at least when I'm pointing off to the side, I have to start where people can see what my hands are doing. Sometimes that works. I know at an earlier call when I was dealing with a different camera and a slower computer, my hands became complete blurs as soon as I started moving. Much worse than you're seeing now, at least much worse than I'm seeing. And so giving the advice for him was make sure your hands are up here. For others, it's make sure your camera will catch the gestures or slow them down so that the camera can keep up with them. Yeah. The other big piece of advice I got to give in this evaluation was to pay attention to the energy of his spine. When you're speaking and you're excited about something or you're on the edge of your seat, your spine is much more straight. When you're dejected, it might be more curved. And those changes can be seen even if you can't see a person's arms, a person's hands. For him, though, he was giving an excited part of the speech, but he was leaning back in his chair and being very relaxed, even though it was an exciting part of the speech. Making sure that the energy of his spine and the energy of his posture matched the energy of his speech helped him immensely the next time he gave that speech. I also recommended to him, start your own Zoom meeting. Just invite, open up a Zoom meeting. You don't have to pay. You don't have to invite anywhere else. But you get that screen and you can see yourself and watch yourself and record yourself. There was a point in his speech where he was so comfortable, he was just kind of sitting here telling us all about it. But what I saw as the audience member was, why in the world are his hands up here by his face? He wasn't even aware that he was doing it. Being able to watch yourself as you give a speech, as you figure out where are those corners of the space that I can use gestures if I want to use gestures, where am I looking? Being able to practice that helps so much.
Now we think about practice as being so important in the real world. And now that we get into the virtual world, it's still the same thing, but it's a much different sort of practice, much different way that we use the screen, much different way that we make eye contact and so forth. And again, if you're not conscious of it, you're not going to get better at it. So it's so helpful for evaluators who have some savvy about Zoom or the other online platforms to give some of those tips. So thank you for that. That's very helpful. I'm going to move back to Gail. Yeah, please.
When you are evaluating someone about their online presence, tell them, look at the camera, and then tell them what it looks like when they look at the camera. Because for him, looking at the camera meant that he was looking about 2 inches over and down, as if that was where the camera was. And so being able to have someone who can tell you when you're looking at the camera versus when you're not,
Right.
It's just a little piece that we can help each other know, what do we look like when we are trying to look at the camera? Does it actually look like we're looking at it?
Right. No,
Thank you.
great point. Thank you. So Gail, in addition to what you do in Toastmasters, you also spend some of your free time coaching TEDx speakers, which I imagine is a much different experience. You've talked about how important it is to gain the speaker's trust. I've heard you say that on a number of occasions, and about the importance of making an emotional connection with the speaker in order to help the speaker connect with the audience. So maybe you can help us understand why this is important and the sort of techniques that you have to gain this trust.
Thanks, David. if we were all together in the same room, I could ask you, because I'm really curious, how many of you have been to a live TEDx event in Massachusetts or anywhere else? I imagine that some of you have, and I'm seeing a couple of hands. I also imagine that you are more than familiar with TEDx Talks and TED Talks. What I love about the TED experience, and I've worked for the last 5 years with TEDx Natick and worked with 8 speakers. What I love is that it really is an energizing place of ideas coming to life and inspiration being in the air. It's wonderful. What's challenging as a speech coach is that TEDx speakers are assigned a speech coach, whether they want one or not, and you are an alien quality in their life because none of the 8 that I have ever worked with have ever even thought of speech coaches, have no idea what they are, and have done quite well without them, thank you very much, as they have gone about, their life. And in TEDx, as you know, we've got really different tracks. Some people are world-class speakers in their field, keynoters at conferences. Others are people who have great ideas that have been fueled locally, but have not had broad exposure. Some have never spoken before, and some have spoken a lot, but have been in venues where people comment on their content and how it aligns with the field that they're all in, as opposed to really giving the kind of feedback that we give in Toastmasters and that we know helps people develop. So I've got a challenge as a stranger trying to support someone who may or may not have ideas about needing support. It's a function, as we all know, of how we start the trust process. And I have great empathy for the fact that TEDx speakers come into the process and they're suddenly, no matter what kind of experience they've had, they're suddenly in a much broader world in terms of the outreach that TEDx has just in the live event. Some events are over 1,000 people. TEDx Natick is 800 people together. And certainly when the video is released, speakers may get as many as 1 million hits or far fewer. But the point is, it's a broad, diverse network of education level, of job experience, of interests that need to be addressed in talking in TEDx, that don't need to be addressed when you're giving content in your own field or to a like-minded group of people. And so the need to really hone in on how I can make people feel safe, because there's a huge amount of vulnerability in suddenly stepping into that arena, especially if you are used to being in control of everything you do. And so I try to find out more about their sense of purpose, more about what drives them, more about their ideas, and what kind of context I can find to bridge their experience with the TEDx experience. The great saving grace, although I am not someone who watches sports, I have a fascination for great coaches, leadership advice, leadership and the advice they give professional teams that can be extremely compelling to turn around energy and make people feel that anything is possible. And so I try to tap into what I've read about the importance of having speakers feel that you believe in them, that your feedback is only about how a great effort can be made even better. But one of the things that I think is particularly important, David asked me earlier about authenticity. It is something that I pay a lot of attention to in TEDx speech coaching, because if you're someone who's had a tremendous amount of experience, you're talking out of an orbit that may or may not relate to the audience that's listening to you. And if you're a new speaker to this kind of forum, it's an entirely alien world for you that needs a lot of support. I had the pleasure, I've enjoyed immensely the 8 people I have worked with and their diversity, but I had immense pleasure in an entomologist who was absolutely passionate about beneficial bugs. She was not someone who auditioned for TEDx. She was someone that they went after because the Boston Globe wrote an article about how her approach with praying mantises had saved the linden trees in the Boston Common. And so she was passionate about conveying beneficial bugs, but she'd never given a speech before. She was not remotely interested in being center stage, not someone who liked calling attention to herself. And so we had quite a lot of dialogue around what would make her feel safe. And the only way I could really hone in and find out more about her was the more we talked, I had glimmers of her charm and her sense of humor and her passion for protecting beneficial bugs. And all of that was not adding up to her excitement about giving the speech. So I realized that she needed to have me play back all the things that I was hearing and the tapestry that I was weaving based on all of her information and all of the interesting and very funny things that happened. And so over time, she became much more comfortable with the fact that she could be center stage and that she did have a great deal to share because her passion for ensuring that all of us protect beneficial bugs so that our gardens and our trees and other things are well preserved is really important. I learned by doing a lot of listening that she's incredibly funny. And so when it came to authenticity, I didn't need to coach her on gestures or vocal variety. I just needed to support her in how she felt comfortable telling an amazing story. And I hope that if you're interested, her TEDx talk is called My Praying Mantis Family. And I think you'll see in it how the audience, which is normally responsive, was continually laughing and engaged in the comical or humorous way that she conveyed otherwise not terribly interesting information, like how you clean a vat that has, hundreds of praying mantises in it. It's not on my list of a top 10,000 things I care about. But the way she told it, because of her natural flair of storytelling, it was absolutely delightful. So I think that what matters in TEDx is the same thing that matters in Toastmasters, is the same thing that matters in our work worlds. It's how we can allow people to feel supported in doing the very best that they can do, that they don't even know they can do until they feel that support.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I'm looking at our list of questions. We have one from the District Director, Christine Lewis, about thoughts about evaluating the evaluator. I'm going to pass that on to Lee, whose Speak Up Cambridge Club seems intent on evaluating just about everything. So what are your thoughts about that, about doing evaluations for the evaluator?
I think it's a great idea, but I would recommend it more for an advanced club than a non-advanced club, that in terms of a group evaluation. Let me backtrack for a second. One of the things that I have noticed in most clubs is that the general evaluator does not evaluate the evaluator, and it's his or her job to do so. It's something that our club does not do a great job of, and most clubs that I've attended their meetings, either live or online, either gives a little bit. Part of that is, it may be because the general evaluator is relatively inexperienced. But for an experienced general evaluator, I think it's a great question. And I think all of us who are in leadership positions at clubs could do a much better job of reminding the general evaluator that this is part of their responsibility.
No, it's a great point. You think about it as being part of the general evaluator's role, and often it falls off the table. So, terrific reminder.
I am, to come in on that same question, I am very much indebted to those experienced Toastmasters who will come up after a meeting and talk to evaluators to evaluate their evaluation. It's a habit to get into that I need to remind myself of, that the evaluating doesn't stop when the speeches are done. You can help, we can help each other if we hear something in an evaluation where we want to give them feedback. We should do so, oftentimes after the meeting when we have time, or through the chat or email capabilities when it's an online meeting. But it's great to just, if you've got something that you want to tell someone, bring it up quickly while that evaluation is still fresh in their mind and they can remember and improve.
Good, thank you. So we often talk about how important it is to make evaluation specific, that it's not particularly useful to tell somebody, I really enjoyed your speech, or you gave a great speech. Much more useful to say, what I really enjoyed about your speech was X, Y, Z. Alice, I know that in your job as a research scientist, you've often expressed frustrations by customers who just seem incapable of giving clear feedback. Can you give an example of this and how it impacted you and how it relates to what we learn as speech evaluators and Toastmasters?
As David said, I'm a research scientist, so I might be working on projects where the goal is to learn about a topic, like how do we make teams more effective, or how can we automatically sort papers into useful categories? And I try to make my top priority helping the customer solve their problems, except if I get really discouraged by their feedback. There was a customer that I completely gave up trying to satisfy because they would give constant, vague, non-actionable negative feedback like, could you do something a lot like what you have been doing, but a lot better and smarter? And, most scientists don't try to be dumb on purpose. I mean, we try to be as smart as we can be. I'd come away from talking to these people feeling confused, discouraged. It was like they were telling me, could you just make your research more magenta and saltier? And I would be thinking, how can I make my team research more magenta? And it just wouldn't even make sense. So because I couldn't understand what they wanted, it made me think they didn't understand what they wanted and that they would never be happy no matter what I did. So it didn't really matter, and I should just do whatever I thought made sense from a scientific point of view. So it made me realize that in life, if you want people just to do whatever they want to do and not care what you want, give them constant negative, vague feedback. And this ties back to Toastmasters because we sometimes say, don't give people too much negative feedback. But I think even more importantly, it can be, don't be too vague in the feedback, because if someone just keeps hearing enunciate more or use gestures more, it can be really discouraging and they can just give up on it. So the more specific we can be, even if it's a critical thing, but if we can make it actionable, then people really want to please. I mean, I want to please my customers. People who are giving speeches want to give speeches that the audience wants to hear. So if we can give them something concrete that they can do, I think most people will do it.
Terrific, thank you. I wanted to mention something about Lee, who's been president of the Speak Up Cambridge Club since, I guess, time immemorial, or at least for several years. And one of the hallmarks of this club is it has a huge number of members and a number of new members at any given time, people who really need to develop their speaking skills, either part of their PhD programs or as they come to work or whatever. So that's wonderful, but the corollary of this is his club tends to have a lot of inexperienced evaluators who he really needs to get up to speed quickly. This is a challenge in order to make the club run. So Lee, could you tell us about some of the things you do to get the newer evaluators comfortable with the role of being evaluators and to advance their development?
Sure, absolutely, David. And I hope that what I'm talking about, it can be applied across other clubs that have new members. It's wonderful having new members. It adds so much energy. And as David mentioned, there is a downside because you end up with, for instance, general evaluators who are relatively inexperienced and unable to give feedback to the evaluators and the evaluators themselves. So there are a few things. First of all, I try to, or we try in the leadership team, we try to follow up with personal notes, especially to inexperienced speakers and also to evaluators. So if they're not getting evaluations at the meetings, they're at least getting some feedback through an email afterwards. And that personal touch, I think, really helps people and they find it very encouraging. So I would encourage other people who are running clubs to try something like that. The other thing about Speak Up Cambridge, which used to be Mount Auburn Toastmasters, is that there's a tradition for evaluating everything. We evaluate table topics. Of course, we evaluate speeches. We also evaluate rants. Rants are something that we do at our club, and I think it's something that I'd love to see other clubs do. These are 1 to 3 minute sort of mini speeches on any topic, as long as it's something that the speaker cares about. Not only does that add another dimension to the meetings, but by evaluating table topics and the rants, it provides a training ground for new evaluators before they try out an entire speech evaluation. So in addition to new members, we also attract a lot of guests, as David, who has attended some of our meetings, can attest to. Sometimes 10 to 20 guests. And I always emphasize to them the second part of the meeting when I'm talking about what to expect, that there's this critical listening element that is so vital to a meeting, and it's also where we learn. And that's why they're delivered, these evaluations are delivered in third person.
Terrific. Thank you, Lee. I'm looking at the clock. It's 8:30, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I don't want to run over. So with that, we'll wrap up for the evening. And I'd like to thank everybody who attended for their interest in the session. And I'd like to thank my wonderful panelists, Alice Leung, Gail O'Brien, Lee Goodwin, and Michael Moore. And last but not least, to our Zoom hosts, Donna Beta and Margarita Persico, who as always do a wonderful job. So hand wave for them. And Education Chair for CLCON, Division Director Extraordinaire, Michelle Bisco, thank you for all your hard work. And of course, for CLCON Chair, Philip Harris. If anybody would like to talk further, please stay on the call. I'm happy to stay on for a little while. I believe most, if not all, of my panelists are willing to stay on for a little while. I have a couple other questions that I have to ask them if you want to stay in to hear that as well. If you want to call it a night, also very understandable. So good night, stay well, stay safe, and thank you.